We're doing tiers again. And no, the tiers don't have to come from you because I had Kevin Durant too low. We're talking power forwards. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd. I've actually just changed my mind. We're just going to debate the entire show about whether the Rookie of the Year is Angel Reese or Caitlin Clark. That's what everyone wants to hear. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_Beeble, on TikTok at redrock_Beeble, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, through to September the 22nd, FanDuel customers, all FanDuel customers, can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com right now to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So thumb it up and leave your comments down below. We have done 3 tiers show: point guard, shooting guard, small forward, just address a couple of things. Yeah, I know me having Kevin Durant down where I had him yesterday is controversial. I get that. And when push comes to shove, when I'm doing a draft and Kevin Durant sits there, and if he's sitting there at 18, I probably would. But there are just a numerous red flags regarding Durant, the addition of Budenholzer, the way that his free throw percentage dropped, but more importantly, his free throw rate fell away in a way that it felt like he was trying to protect himself from injuries. The likelihood of him playing 75 games, again, is incredibly low. All that sort of stuff. I get it. Right. I understand that part of it. But I don't think if anyone came in last season and said, you know what, guys, I'm pretty sure, I'm very confident that Scottie Barnes is going to have a better season than Steph Curry. Everyone would have got, you're crazy, there's no way, that's Steph, it's Barnes, what are you talking about? Yeah, I think Barnes might be better, but we can't predict that, and weird stuff happens. Weird stuff happens all the time, and the way that the numbers projected out, it just did not love Kevin Durant. I know it's a lot of talk on Durant, we're going to talk about him a bit later. The other thing is when we do these different position shows, sometimes when I do point guards, or we do shooting guards, or we do small forwards, and the players cross over between the two, sometimes actually the tiers change, and that's part of the hard part from my perspective of doing these shows. Is that trying to create the tiers. I've got all the guys who are shooting guard eligible, and then I've got all the guys in the list who are small forward eligible. And you've got to try and create tier zones that make sense in that pool of players. And if we're looking at all the shooting guards, the tier might cut off at a different spot versus small forwards. The relative strength of the position necessarily cuts off at a different area. So some guy might be ahead one tier in talking about him in shooting guards, but then we get into small forwards and then those guys end up being in the same tier. And you're going to see that happen in today's show. What I hope that you would take out of that is that there is so much variability in all of these players, in all the ways we look at them, so don't be so stuck. Even we break down individual rankings and take it into tiers to make it a little bit more easy to understand or accessible. But even that, players can be very, very different. The gaps between them can be much smaller than you expect. So if someone sits in tier 5 versus tier 6, depending on his positions, the difference is not that gigantic. That couldn't be just changed like that. That is how we work in fantasy and now. Any definitive ideas, and none of this is definitive, we need to sort of get away from. The other part of it is if I have someone in tier 3 versus someone in tier 4, that does not mean that I would pick the guy in tier 3 ahead of the guy in tier 4. That is not what I mean. That is more about you use your advantage to maybe get that guy in tier 4 you pick earlier, then you get the tier 3 guy 2 rounds later and you end up with 2 high-end players. It's not about, this guy's here, I have to draft him here. I think they might be in that same zone, or this guy might be better than this other player. But that doesn't always, a lot of the time it does, but it doesn't always equate one-on-one or one-to-one with where that guy gets picked and this guy should get picked ahead of this other player. I hope that's not confusing. I hope that is clear enough. But it's not take every tier 3 player before every tier 4 player. Not necessarily. Even if we think the tier 3s will be better than tier 4s, and you might disagree with that, working a draft room can be important. And depending on what sort of stats you need. Sorry for the long preamble there. We are talking power forwards. That is where we are at in this journey. Let's start with tier 1 of power forwards. Surely there's zero debate about this. It is Giannis and it is Anthony Davis. I don't see a different way that goes. Giannis had an ADP of 6 on Yahoo, 5 on ESPN. Giannis is going to have bad free throws. It does not preclude you from winning free throws. It does not preclude you from accumulating 8 roto points in the free throw category. In a points league, Giannis is clearly there. Giannis has injury concerns. So does Anthony Davis. So does most players. You probably won't win free throws most weeks with Giannis, but that's also okay. But it doesn't absolutely just tie you. You don't 100% have to lose that category. So he sits there relatively comfortably. I would have no problem actually jumping Giannis to 4. Taking it, if you really wanted to avoid Luka's 2-game playoff week, you could consider Giannis. I don't know that I would, but you could. And the same goes with Anthony Davis. He's in that similar zone to me. AD was healthy last season. And he showed that the part when I talk about players being injury prone and when I avoid and when I don't, is that AD had random injuries falling into the crowd. Hurt his hand, hurt his calf, fall on his ass, whatever it was. But it wasn't, this is the same thing that is happening every single time. Multiple surgeries, same leg. That wasn't the AD case and things were good. Now, things might not be good this season. Things might be good. Just because you had a healthy season the year before for someone like AD does not mean the next year means he's not healthy. That's not how that works. He could have 3 great years in a row. He could go back and miss a lot of time. I've got no idea. He was awesome. Davis averaged 25 points with 13 rebounds and 2.3 blocks. Part of the reason why I was not as high on Davis last season was not really because of health. It was more because in previous seasons, we'd seen a lot of his stats drop, his efficiency drop, his free throws drop. He wasn't an 82% free throw shooter. His rebound numbers had continued to decline. And that all changed last season. Free throws back up, rebound rate back up, and that turned him back into the elite per game player. Because most of the time, now there is games played taken into consideration on these tiers, but most of the time I'm talking per game. And Davis, I was not projecting per game top 5 last season because rebound rate and free throw rate had been steadily declining. And he jumped it way back up. Maybe it falls off again. I'm not sure. Maybe. It's possible. Let's go to tier 2. When talking power forwards. These are, a lot of these are guys, well, I say a lot of them. There's only one player in tier 2, and it is the big fella, Jayson Tatum, who was up the top of the small forwards tier. He sits here with an ADP of 10. ESPN, he sits at number 7. It's not bad. It's pretty good. He's solid enough. I don't love him as a first-round guy, but the back of again, this mentality that is hard to shake is that maybe the back end of the first round, maybe there's no one who is actually a first-round caliber player. So you're going to have to take guys that you consider second rounders in that spot. And that is probably true when we evaluate the players. The difference between 1 and 10 is so big that the guys that you consider in that back end of the first round aren't really first round caliber players. If you want to use Luka, Shea, Doncic, Wemby, I said Luka twice, I meant Jokic, Giannis, whoever. Like those guys at 8 or 9 aren't remotely close. So they are sort of second round players. But they have to go in the first round because the first round's got a certain number of picks. So I don't want to put Tatum into that top 6 group or anything along those lines. And I don't like someone saying, well, we draft him because he doesn't get hurt, because like I said, that could change at any point. But he's solid here. His usage will probably bump early in the season and drop later in the season. He's really good at this spot, Jayson Tatum. We are happy to have him in this area. We're also happy to have FanDuel because we've been talking about FanDuel for a long time. And now we're going to talk about something a little bit different with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because now, up until September the 22nd, that's about 3 weeks away, you can, as an existing or even a new FanDuel customer, if you just bet $5, you get 3 weeks, free trial, NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and from YouTube TV. With your YouTube TV base plan, you're able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market NFL game, and all you need is that Google account. Make sure there's a valid form of payment linked to it as well. And of course, you can cancel that at any point. So go to FanDuel.com, download. I have to say FanDuel sometimes because sometimes the captioning puts it up like I'm talking about like sparkly gems. No. FanDuel.com, FanDuel, download America's #1 sportsbook, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. So, tier 2, done. It's just Jayson Tatum. Let's look at tier 3. There's a lot of space or a lot more striation as we talk about at the top of these tiers as always. And this one does get controversial. I've got Paul George and LeBron James sitting here in tier 3. And yes, there is obviously some risk of injury with LeBron. He is older. And people would have that argument about the Kevin Durant stuff, but historically, LeBron has been healthier than Kevin Durant. Historically, he has. Paul George, relatively healthy last season. He's had a couple of those little knocks and that sort of stuff. I think Paul George is going to be really good. But I also understand that when Paul George sits with the ADP of 30 and 43 on ESPN, you don't take him here. You don't have to take him here. There's no reason to. You just get that a little bit later, and I think you feel pretty good about doing it. And you might not feel good about doing it. People, again, he's one of those players, Paulie, that people don't like. And they can not like him for whatever reason, but they don't like him. So therefore, everything gets pushed down with him. Fine. But I think that in this tier 3 of power forwards, which probably is sort of middle to late second round zone, I think Paul George should be sitting here. I think this is probably the right spot for him. Along with LeBron, you got to have concerns about both of these guys. I do. It is troubling. Worrying about the age or how Paul George fits on a new team. That's a worry for me as well. But I do like where his projections go. He fills out numerous categories. I think both of these guys are solid enough in a head-to-head setting here. Solid enough, I hope. We all hope, don't we? Let's move on to tier 4 across the power forward positions. Or not the positions, the position. I've got 2 guys in this grouping. And this will be, again, there'll be a level of controversy around the 2 guys that I've got here because people will suggest these guys should go ahead of LeBron and Paul George, and that is okay. You can draft Scottie Barnes and you can draft Chet Holmgren ahead of LeBron and Paul George. That's totally reasonable. Chet's ADP is 16 on Yahoo. It's 27 on ESPN, which is lower than I expected it to be. Barnes sits at 20 and 21, which is still back end second round. Now, yesterday, I inadvertently disrespected Scottie Barnes and put a graphic up about him, but that I hadn't changed the picture and had Kevin Durant on the picture, even though we've got the stats. So let's correct it. And let's put the full Scottie Barnes graphic up. He was great last season, obviously. I do worry about if the usage has got room to grow, where the 3-point percentage sits and the free throws and the blocks and all that stuff hold with those new guys around him for a full year, Barrett and Quickly, but he's still great. And if you wanted to take it, and again, the second round is a weird one and the end of the first is weird with the valuations of those players. And if you thought you want to take Barnes at 14 or 15, because if you're more confident he's younger, go for it. I think it's actually reasonable. If you want to take Barnes ahead of LeBron and Paul George, go for it. I think it's reasonable. My projections have the other 2 guys sizably ahead, but that's okay, because then you can get those guys in the next round if you wanted. I'm not fully convinced that all the numbers we saw with Barnes in that limited size with those other players, they didn't give me the greatest confidence that there's way more improvement coming. There might be. But he's totally good in this area. And the other one with Chet is the concern we have here is Chet was great. He only played 30 minutes a night, so there's room for that to improve. He probably does get more usage with Josh Giddey gone. But what happens with Isaiah Hartenstein? Because the more that you play away from the basket, field goals, blocks, rebounds will almost invariably drop. I'm not saying he's going to suffer the same drop as Karl Anthony Towns did, but Towns suffered a significant drop. So there is something of a concern there that Holmgren might not be able to keep up what he did or advance his production because of the way the team got stronger at his position. So like him here, absolutely love it for that spot, but going, there would have been people thinking, and I don't think it's really happening at the moment, but there were people who were like, I'll just take him, Chet Holmgren, at the end of the first round. And I don't really get behind that part of it. I don't think that's the way to go. So let's talk tier 5. As you'll notice, we're still really early here. We're still talking probably round 2 players. So when we split these guys into tiers, there is groupings between guys, but we are still really early in a fantasy draft. And this is highlighting that issue that I talked about yesterday, whereas the tiering system is a little different between positions because of the relative strengths. So I've got a lot of guys in this group: Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Jalen Williams, and Evan Mobley in this spot. I've already highlighted my concerns with Durant in yesterday's show. I talked about it again at the start of this show because of that. We worry about the free throws, and we'd love to hear what the NBA is going to do in terms of with how aggressively they're adjusting and calling those things. How does Durant, and how we want to hear from Budenholzer, what's he planning on doing with preserving players the way that he did in Milwaukee? Because again, if Durant plays 34 instead of 37, that's a big difference. That is a big difference. So I've got him in this same area as Jalen Williams. Jalen Williams is young. I think Jalen Williams is going to step forward. I think Jalen Williams is going to play more minutes. He played 31 a game last year. This is the also thing. That's an easy one to criticize. How can you have KD and Jalen Williams similar? Well, they played like 6 minutes per game difference last season. What if those two things come together? What if Williams jumps 5 usage and gets an extra 2 assists? Then we can have a conversation. And like I said, you wouldn't have thought that Scottie Barnes would be better than Steph Curry last season, but he was. And I'm not even saying that I would take Jalen Williams ahead of Kevin Durant or where Kawhi fits in. This Kawhi's a tough one. He'd be a top 10 player per game. It's all about how much he plays. And I will not take Kawhi in the first 2 rounds because I am worried. I probably won't take him in round 3, even though my projections love him. And they love him even considering losing games. Missing 20, 25 games. The projections still love that, even with a replacement player put onto it. And that's why he sits in this area. But there's plenty of risk associated there. Evan Mobley. Not sure how much scope there is for a rise in usage. Don't know. Not sure what they're going to do in terms of playing him at center more or how Kenny Atkinson uses him. But he improved as a three-point shooter. I'd like to see a little bit more volume out of that. I think he's pretty safe in this area. Mobley, 41 ADP, Yahoo, 44 on ESPN. I think that's all relatively safe and sensical, maybe. Tier 6. So we're talking relatively early here in these first couple of rounds through in fantasy. And again, as always, when you're drafting in category leagues, take the guys that make sense to you. We have got a very intriguing group here in Tier 6 because every one of these 3 players, it is very, very easy to argue about their availability. We have had very heated debates, well, not even heated, passionate debates about the value of these guys over the past couple of years. And the names are, I'll tell you, it's Jaren Jackson, Lauri Markkanen, and Zion Williamson. Jaren played through most stuff last season, but in previous years had not. He'd had multiple knee and foot injuries, which is a concern. His ADP on ESPN's insane at 66. Is that the worst ESPN ADP today? We'll find out. It's pretty bad. He's better than that, but now his usage should come back, but his efficiency should go up. Does his shot blocking go up? I don't know. What does Zach Edey do for his rebounds? Does Zach Edey's big body open up Jaren to actually be a better rebounder? Or does Jaren just get fewer rebounds? Not sure. Lauri Markkanen, ADP of 41 on ESPN, 33 on Yahoo. Okay. But is he playing any games in March? I don't know. The Jazz are going to shut him down, probably. And that's one of only 2 teams that I feel okay about saying that with. And the other one there is Zion Williamson, who has an ADP of 51 on Yahoo, 44 on ESPN, and I do think that he's only 24, man. I think we're going to get some real big stuff from Zion because at the beginning of last season, he was relatively passive. They didn't have him as the number 1 guy. His assist rate was down. His usage was down. I am pretty confident that the Pelicans are coming in this season and they're like, Zion's the man. Ingram, get out of the way. McCollum, get out of the way. Zion also has slimmed down a lot, but we saw the second half of last season, he just turned into a better defender. He started playing better defense. He's not crazy. Like, he had 30 usage and 23 points and 57% shooting. Zion could, theoretically, average 27. He could have 33 usage. He could shoot 60% from the field. He averaged 1.1 steals and 0.7 blocks. That could be 1.3 and 0.8. He could go to 5.6 assists. He probably won't because DeJounte's there. He's probably never going to be a three-point shooter. That's okay. But he does get underrated at times quite a bit, I think, Zion Williamson. And I'm not going to underrate him at this point, which is okay. But I do like him in that same tier. And there's different concerns with Zion and with Markkanen and with Jaren Jackson in that round 3, 4, 5, however you want to view that sort of a range. Let's come back now. That's 6 tiers done for the power forward. So let's go in now for tier 7. Start to take a look at who sits here. And we start to get towards the middle to back rounds. And we have we have more players in this one, a slightly larger group, and there is a couple of names that you haven't heard yet that I have put into this tier, which again, there'll be some, enough controversy is necessarily right, but we've got Paolo Banchero, DeMar DeRozan, Jalen Johnson, Julius Randle, and Karl Anthony Towns. There was a time a few years ago where Towns was just a very easy first-round player. I got off of that early when he moved to be a second-round guy, and I think I've been pretty right on Towns most of the way through. Factoring a little bit of the recent lower body injury history for him here, which has been it's been a concern without any question, and putting him in this area, I think feels right. But there'll be other people who say, well, Jalen Johnson's ready for a breakout. And I do agree with that. I think Johnson's going to see maybe not more minutes, but more usage for sure. I worry that his free throws and three-point shooting just after a hot 30-ish game start to the year completely fell away. And a lot of his impact stuff fell off as well. I'm a little worried about some of that. But around these guys, I think it's totally okay. I think we've got to be really cautious about pushing too high on Jalen Johnson. And thankfully, I haven't seen the complete inflation of him going in round 2 or anything like that. DeRozan, the ADP at 29 is too high on ESPN, and he will probably have to suffer something joining the Kings. But he's solid enough here, and we've talked a lot about Paolo Banchero and the percentage issues, but he is heading into year 3. I think there's going to be more improvement. That is still really valuable, those numbers, and how you figure out around that. It is possible to do, and we're not precluding any improvement there. The other one who sits in this group is Julius Randle, and he's a tough one to figure out because obviously he missed the second half of last season. It does feel like the Knicks would consider moving him, but Thibodeau loves him. The Knicks love him. For what reason, I don't know, but they do. Randle's much like Paolo Banchero. You probably get bad field goals and bad free throws, even though Randle's numbers last year in both those categories were better than Paolo's easily, and they were fine. But he never gets any defensive stats. Like a combined 0.8 is horrendous. 0.5 steals and 0.3 blocks is terrible. But that could become 0.7 steals and 0.6 blocks, which is still bad, but it's not insanely low. He's going to play a lot of minutes. He's going to get usage. He's going to pass the ball. You have to understand where his deficiencies lie, and I think we know that. But at times, Randle, there'll be times, like his ADP is 66, which is whatever, but there'll be times where he'll fall into the 80s or 90s of drafts, and that's not really, I think, the right idea in terms of where his value should be. Let's go on to tier 8 now for the power forward position. We've got, how many guys have we got in this group? Is this one of the big ones? No, we've got 5 guys sitting in this tier. Names that are really quite different. Mikal Bridges, Jim Butler, Draymond Green, Pascal Siakam, and Franz Wagner. Very different players. Pascal is going to get you there with points. He's going to score a lot. Draymond is going to score 6 points. But he might have 7 rebounds, 7 assists, and over a steal and a block. And he shot way better. And how you value those two things is really different. For some of you, that makes a lot of sense to have Draymond there. For others of you, you won't need to do that. And there's a lot of risk, obviously, with Draymond. And you can see the big ADP difference. 115 for Draymond ESPN. Siakam 40. Big difference. The difference between those guys is not that large. Someone sent me, Tim sent me an email the other day, which I haven't got back to you, but here's the answer, Tim, if you're watching. Is why don't you reference FBI ADP? It seems to be more accurate. FBI... not FBI, so Fantrax ADP, because FBI has had a lot of their draft-only leagues there, which draft-only does skew things a little bit. The reason I don't really focus significantly on Fantrax ADP is, as much as I believe that Fantrax is the place where you should play your leagues, and it is clearly the best, the vast majority of people are on Yahoo and ESPN. So when you're going out there and you're doing a draft on ESPN in your league or Yahoo on your league, where the ADP sits on Fantrax is actually irrelevant for those leagues, I think. When we get into the more team-specific stuff and pushing through, we will start to incorporate more Fantrax ADP stuff. But I think now when we're talking about this stuff, like Yahoo and ESPN still have the bulk of leagues, and I think those numbers are probably more relevant. But I could be wrong on that. I could be wrong in terms of the relevance or what you prefer to see, but that's why I do that. Talked a lot about Jimmy Butler and Mikal Bridges yesterday. My worries about Butler and his decline/health are, I think, well-founded. And not really anyone else there I think we need to go on about too much more. Let's talk tier 9 for fantasy basketball and for power forwards. this is the one that's bigger. Yep, we've got 8 players in tier 9, and we'll start in New York with OG Anunoby's got an ADP outside the top 100. I don't really, not that I don't understand it. I get it because he's not a high scorer, but like that, it really shouldn't be the that shouldn't be the move. That shouldn't be where he's positioned. He's better than that. Yes, the scoring and usage won't be so high, but he can hit some threes, steals, blocks. He's going to play a lot of minutes. I'm okay with it. We've got Miles Bridges in this area as well, who I think the ADP for him, it's obviously wildly different between the two sites, 58 versus 94. But I do think that Bridges, he sort of sits somewhere in the middle there. Usage will probably drop. I expect minutes drop under Charles Lee, but maybe efficiency rises because LaMelo Ball's back. I think that's relatively reasonable. We've got the Thick Hogsman, Tobias Harris, who just does everything at an average rate, and will likely see good starting minutes in Detroit, and usage will probably rise from where he was in Philadelphia. You can grab him around this area. I think it's totally reasonable, and he could actually be better than this. And then the other one is on the other side of it is John Kuminga with an ADP in the 90s. I'm not sure how the Warriors will start. Will they start Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond at the 3-4-5? Will they start Kuminga, Draymond, Trace Jackson Davis? Will they start Wiggins, Draymond, Trace Jackson Davis with Kuminga off the bench? Honestly, there are so many ways they can run that. But the fact that there is so many different ways they can run that, there's always got to be a level of skepticism. Will Kuminga play 34 minutes or will he hover at 30 so that everyone else gets on the court? He did step up a lot last year. I think his usage goes up even further. I do like him here, especially for points. He's never going to do anything defensively. Defensive stats and his volume stuff on threes is pretty low. But I think he's just going to be able to not necessarily overwhelm us, but get there with a little bit more value because of just more shots. The other 4 guys I've got in tier 9 is Kyle Kuzma, who is still going to be starting, who is still going to have pretty good usage, and he improved his assist numbers last year. And much like Randall and much like Banchero, he doesn't get defensive stats. We know this. But the other stuff is pretty valuable still. Trey Murphy's one of the interesting ones. If Brandon Ingram moves on, and apparently he wasn't joining the team for optional workouts, voluntary workouts, which is okay. We'll see. Like, he's obviously wants this max extension that no one wants to give him. They just need more Trey. You don't need to take Trey Murphy here. Obviously, 128 on ESPN, you don't need him in this same area. We're talking 60 spots difference between his ADP and the next guy, Keegan Murray. But Trey has that ability. Whereas Keegan, I worry that he's going too high. I think his usage maybe falls back. Does the shooting bounce back up? Possibly. But will he ever get an opportunity to touch the ball and do anything? And that becomes a problem. And then the other one I've got here, for some reason, he is a power forward. I don't know why, but it is the big fella, Nikola Vucevic, who I think that I was relatively accurate on last season, saying that I obviously didn't want to take him in round 1 or round 2 or round 3 or round 4. And that was accurate. And I actually think it might get worse for him this season. They want to move him on. I don't know whether they will or not. I think there's a chance they could end up maybe not even splitting minutes, but like he loses a little bit to Jalen Smith. Because at the moment, he's just not a very good player. He can put up numbers when situations arise, but it's not the situation where DeRozan's gone, so Vooch has to step up because DeRozan's out, Levine is in. We'll see how, and Giddey's also there. I'm just not big on Vooch, and maybe he finishes better than these guys. Completely reasonable. I'm just not. I see the decline coming, and I have seen it coming, and I worry that there's going to be a big sharp cut at some point in the middle of the season. Let's go on to tier 10 of our fantasy power forwards. We have got in tier 10, just a small tier actually, this one. And Dan Gafford makes it into this group. Now, he's never been a power forward, so I don't really know why he's got that eligibility, but that actually is a W for you if you're drafting. I believe that Derek Lively will start over Dan Gafford and would be the player that I would probably take over Gafford in a draft. But Gafford slots into this zone because even in 21 or 22 minutes in a category league, not a points league, in a category league, he can still have pretty good value. Pretty good value. I got Herb Jones here. Obviously, ridiculously different player. He hits some threes. He gets a lot of steals, whereas Gafford's getting blocks and field goals. Jabari Smith is in this zone. While it's year 3, we do expect breakouts from year 3 players. I don't really know where it comes from in Houston. I don't know where he's getting more shots. He improved his efficiency, and that can probably improve. But will he ever be an assist guy? Will the defensive stats rise? And I think they could. The blocks could go up. But I'm not super convinced. And then we go to Michael Porter Jr., who His Yahoo ADP at 66 is crazy. We don't want that. He is 26, so he's right in his prime. He played 32 minutes a night with 21 usage, and the absence of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope does not give Michael Porter more usage. In fact, losing KCP and bringing in Russell Westbrook probably makes it harder for Porter to get usage, because one of them is a 24 minimum usage player, and the other one was a 13 usage player. I'm not saying that Westbrook's going to start, but they are going to cross over in terms of their minutes. Porter averaged 17 and 7 last season, but there's no assists, no steals, no blocks. The percentages are good, but the volume's not super high. Him at 66 is a waste of a pick, but him sitting with these guys, I think does make quite a bit of sense. Let's go on to tier 11. Got 5 players in this tier, and one of them is the big fella, Rowan Barrett Jr., who I think his ADP sits probably about the right spot, 104, 97, and I've talked about him a lot and about the way that he changed his game, and I think that holds. I've got Brandon Ingram here. Part of this is, again, just the uncertainty of his role, and does he become the third usage player behind Zion and DeJounte? What about with CJ? And what else does he do? He can't really shoot in volume. I don't know. And that ADP at 57 and 64, I feel like he's a huge burnt pick. I do have Trace Jackson Davis in this spot as well. He's power forward eligible. Don't know why he's not a power forward. But if he plays 24 minutes, I'm very confident in what he can bring. Much like with Gafford, get some blocks, get some field goals, some rebounds. A couple of sneaky passes, maybe. I don't know what they're going to do in investing in him, and you don't need to take him anywhere near this zone. But I like it. Got Naz Reid here. Maybe Reid gets 1 to 2 extra minutes with Kyle Anderson gone. Still don't think there's significantly huge ceiling on Reid. People do love what Naz brings a lot of the time. I'm a little cooler on him than others. But, he is solid enough here. And Jeremy Sohan, I think he's going to play 30-plus minutes. I think he's going to start. I think we can get some improvement in three-point shooting and some steal numbers. Maybe not. But he heads into year 3, and I think there's a solid enough role here to take him around this area. Again, all the projections have these guys in a similar spot. I would probably take Barrett and Ingram ahead of the other guys. But I'm also not going to tell you that Ingram's so much better than everyone here. And I think there's some undervalued guys like Sohan and Jackson Davis that it is important for us to highlight. Tier 12 is a very busy tier. John Collins could have made the argument to go into tier 11, but I do worry that the Jazz will just be like, we are only running the younger guys now, so just be cautious with that. Tari Eason's here. If an injury occurs, well, he will blow through this number. Absolutely no problem. But at the moment, he's a backup. Jeremy Grant's here. Ides of March. It's going to kill him. He's a putrid rebounder. He's going to score a little bit, pretty well, but his game is relatively empty. I've got Taylor Hendricks here. That's sort of a hedge against John Collins. I think they could go Hendricks-Kessler together and no Collins. Hendricks can block some shots and shoot. It was rough at times, but I think there's a pretty solid role coming. Got Al Horford here. Understanding that Horford is going to sit every back-to-back, it makes him a harder decision in head-to-head leagues. And they're not going to push him 35 minutes just because Porzingis is out, but he will start and he will play more minutes and there'll be more value in him. The good thing is the Celtics have the fewest back-to-backs in the NBA, so that does help Horford. So usually I'd be like, I'm just not going to bother with him. But for this season, especially early on, I'm okay. And similarly, there's John Isaac here, who's per game numbers, and if he plays 24 minutes a night, he probably beats this pretty comfortably. But there's still going to be risk of injury and risk of back-to-backs and all of that stuff. But his defensive stats are very, very obviously huge. The rest of tier 12, I've got Cam Johnson. Not much more to say about him. He's an injury risk. He lacks in a lot of other areas of his game, but some scoring and threes. I've got Onyeka Okongwu here. If we hear that Okongwu is the starter, he will jump 5 tiers probably. At the moment, I'm sort of hedging my bets with about 25 minutes a night. But if I hear that he's going to be the starter confirmed, and I am leaning that way, and he plays 29, he's well ahead of this. I've got Alex Sarr here, who I believe will start. He will block shots. He's not a terrible passer. There'll be rookie growing pains for sure, but it's worth a flyer. I've got Asar Thompson. The minutes, who knows? Tobias, Fontecchio, Asar, Holland, Hardaway. Where he fits in, I'm not really sure. We don't really know how Bickerstaff will use him, but if Bickerstaff latches on, he will get a lot of minutes, and we know that the rebounding's awesome and the steals and blocks are great. And that's fantastic. Got PJ Washington there, probably low upside, very streaky. And then Andrew Wiggins. I would say Wiggins at this point is high upside. He was putrid. terrible, disgusting last season. But he did improve. But he could also be a 26-minute player off the bench like we detailed with Kuminga earlier on. Like, where the hell do those minutes come from? How does he play enough? But I don't think, and I've been in mock drafts where this happened, where he just has been undrafted, and I don't think that should be the case. Let us go into the final tier. We're talking tier 13 for power forward eligible players. And there are players on this list that you may think, again, don't really belong here. And players who produced well above this last season. Denny Avdia's in this group to me. 126, ADP, Yahoo, 131, ESPN. He was pretty good last season. Big improvement second half of the season. Working as the number 2. And in Portland, there's Scoot, there's Simons, there's Jeremy Grant, there's Aiden. And I talked about this yesterday. I just don't know how he touches it enough. Aaron Gordon's here. Limited upside. Solid enough. Got to punt your free throws. Josh Hart, 45 minutes a night, got us here. He won't get that this season. Bobby Portis, one of the worst defensive big men in the game. But if Giannis or Brook Lopez does get hurt, then Portis will do more. And then the last one that I've got here, I had to slide him in. It's Kristaps Porzingis. Now, Porzingis is going to be out probably until January. And I would say Porzingis is not back to full minutes until close to the end of January. His ADP is at 68. He was like a 30 per game player last season. He's 29 years of age. He only played 30 minutes and with 25 usage. Like, he played 30 minutes a game last season, Porzingis. He is not playing 30 minutes a night this season. They are going to be so extra cautious with him all the way through when he returns. So this is your last pick in draft. So he's going to go before this. The level of risk you can take on drafting a Porzingis is going to depend on your league settings, how deep it is, how many IL slots you have. If you have one IL slot, you can't really do this because that hamstrings you the whole season. If you're in a weekly league with a larger bench, then he can sit there and it's okay and it doesn't hurt you. But the problem is also going to be that when he comes back January, he's going to be in and out, and low minutes for a period of time. Extra cautious. Like, does he even play 30 games this season? That's where 68 is insane to me. Thankfully, most mock drafts that I've done with Porzingis, every mock draft's had Porzingis in it, but every draft that I've done, he's gone around 100, 120 bench spot, which is totally reasonable. And if you get into a squeeze and you need him, or you need that roster spot, you can decide you're going to move on or not. It is hard to do that. But we have to remember that he is out for a long period of time. And when he comes back, it's not rolling through at 33 minutes. There's almost no way he tops that 30 minutes a night that he played last season. I don't know why the Celtics would do that. The answer is they wouldn't, but there's just no reason for them to do that. So that is the power forward tiers done. Next will be coming center tiers. When that is, whether it's today or not, up for debate, we'll see. But I hope that, again, some of the explanations at the start made sense to you, some of the reasonings why some guys may be higher or lower than you expect or I expect. It'd be very easy for me to come here and say, let's do tiers. Well, everyone thinks that KD should be in round 1, so I'll put him with the round 1 guys. And everyone thinks Brandon Ingram's a player in the 60s. I'll put him in the 60s. And what's the point of that? That's just following the ADP list and saying, just take them at their ADPs, which I'm not here to do that. I'm here to give you reasons and explanations because we know that things go haywire at all points in the NBA and in seasons, and guys are way worse and way better. Like last season, Zach LaVine obviously got hurt, but like he was like a top 40 player the year before and then finished like 90th per game. Okay? I'm not saying you can always predict that stuff, but it doesn't just follow a consistent and straight pattern. So I try to always give a reasoning as to why we're doing something, where it could go wrong or what could change or why this might happen. And I hope you find value in that. That does mean that we are done. Sort of. Hit a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe. I don't know if I said that already, but if I have, it doesn't matter. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.